Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us. My name is Olga Atamanova, and it's my pleasure to see all of you here in Ukraine Media Center Ukraine Forum. It's been 10 years of the war, and today is day 523 of the full-scale invasion of our homeland by Russian aggressor. And the topic of our briefing will be Ukrainian grain and the ways of its exports. Joining us in the studio is Denis Marchuk, Deputy Chairman of the Ukrainian Agrarian Council. Good afternoon. So what are the ways? I think that now the efforts of many countries work on re-establishing in some format the grain deal that was operating. Is it possible now? Do you see it as a way out, or should we look for some new ways of exports? Well, the Russian aggression gains new formats because they attack not only Ukrainians and Ukrainian territory, but they threaten the food security of the world. We see it on the examples of bombarding of the ports of Danube and the ports of Odessa, and it creates misbalance in supply of Ukrainian products to global markets, so the world under receives what they were counting on, which results in the growth of prices to cereal crops more than 5%. And according to the forecast of the analysts, if the situation continues to be like this, when Ukraine has no access to the Black Sea ports, the price may grow more than 15%. So we're reverting the situation to the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Russia to a full-scale invasion of Russia, which resulted in growth of price, which resulted in more threats to food security of the countries of Africa and Asia. Africa needs the grain now real bad because with the potential of price growth like this, it will be impossible for them to procure the grain, which will result in the risk of famine in the region. So Ukraine, with its partners, takes all necessary steps to continue the grain initiative, whether with Russia or without them. But one way or another, we should have access to the Black Sea ports. And there is a statement by the representatives of the United States and the European Commission and even the African continent who expressed their position in the summit Africa Russia, where they clearly let Russia know that they're not interested in favors. They don't want to be a hostage of one country. So this is why there was a NATO-Ukraine meeting initiated upon the initiative of the president of Ukraine, and there was a statement about the necessity to create secure conditions in the Black Sea, and also about the support in development of the alternative ways. This is where we're coming back to this question: what can be the alternative ways? Obviously, the new ports are position number one in the list of alternative ways, because our potential was about 2.5 million tons before the attacks, and now the movement was suspended from Romania to Ukraine. It's clear the owners of the ships, the traders, they were afraid of further attacks, so the market resumed its operation now, but there is a nuance. The freight of the ships has grown. So to pay for 1 ton of reloading, it will be more expensive, and it will all should be paid by the Ukrainian agrarians who suffer losses now, because while the prices in the world grow, in Ukraine they are one of the lowest, about 5 to 6,000 hryvnias per ton of grain. And for example, with the delivery to the port from, for example, Western region, it will be half of that cost of the grains, and it makes no sense, such a business. So this is why we are addressing the European Commission, the leading agrarian associations, and the Ministry of Agriculture of Ukraine to expand the roadways so we could export 1.5 million of tons of grain, but a couple of things should be done for this to increase the infrastructure of the ports of the European zone, because when Ukrainian agrarians bring their grain to Poland, Slovakia, Bulgaria and Romania, it's the big difference when we will come to other ports of Baltic countries, which will result of growth of prices like plus $45 per ton, and those funds are unavailable to the agrarians, and we've asked the European Commission to compensate the part of the cost for transit, which allowed us to get more ports involved in the initiative in Bulgaria, Netherlands and other countries, and this work is underway now. Moreover, we need to improve the transportation through the transit zones to avoid artificial obstacles and delays, and we've stressed in this contract that it would be good that there is no phytosanitary control during the crossing of the transit country, so that the phytosanitary control is exercised at the point of destination. Now new harvest is being intensely gathered, and it would facilitate the ways of delivery of Ukrainian grain. So alternative ways is yet another option for our exports, but within the framework of UN, Ukraine and Turkey, we continue consultations to continue the operation of the grain deal in the Black Sea. Well, the alternative ways, you said, are the European Union countries through which we can export, but again, there are some countries which insist on continuation of the so-called embargo on our exports. To what extent it will influence? Do you understand what is the phase of this process? Can this embargo be continued really? Yeah, in fact, there is ban of 4 types of Ukrainian products to Poland, Hungary, Romania and Bulgaria. What should have been a temporary phenomena became permanent. It was extended since May to June, then from June to July, and the headliners of this process, Poland, now demand this embargo to be extended until the end of the year 2023. There are statements by the Polish Minister for Agrarian Policy and the Prime Minister, so it's a really difficult component, because given the fact that when those decisions were taken, the Black Sea initiative, the grain deal was operated. Now that the Black Sea is blocked, it's important for us to have all those embargoes lifted after the 15th of September. So now we initiate further negotiations with the European Commission, and we should take into account that the business structures of Poland also stated that they are interested in Ukrainian food, and they don't accept the unilateral decisions taken by their government. So what will be the situation? We will find out from the European Commission, because it's their prerogative. The solution of the trade disputes inside the European zone. But again, it's more about policy rather than real economic levers, because since May until this very day, there was no proof, no figures that would evidence the massive inflow of Ukrainian products in Poland, which resulted in fall of prices of Polish products, and it doesn't look like protection of Polish farmers. Well, when there was a peak of activity of Polish farmers, the prices started falling in Eurozone and global markets as well. Mr. Denis, what is the amount of this year's harvest, and what is the dynamic compared to the last year? Well, the dynamic is sometimes better than in year 2022, because thanks to the favorable weather conditions in some regions, the indicators of wheat harvesting are quite significant, and we are about to harvest 7 million tons of grain and oil crops. Last year the harvest was 78 tons, so it's no big difference. Meanwhile, many agriculture manufacturers were forced to suspend or terminate their activity. Well, we would be able to guarantee the food security within the country. We need like at least 18-20 million tons. But given the residues from the last year amounting to about 9 million tons of cereal and oil crops, this year's export potential will grow to 56 million tons. So we're getting back to the beginning of our briefing. To export all of it, we need the corridors, we need the ways to export all those products. Otherwise, we will be back into a situation when within a month or two there will be a preparation to another sowing campaign, and the agrarians we have their silos full of their products they were not able to export, and they will have to reduce the amount of the territories to be sown, which will eventually result in their refuse to sow their lands. Thank you, dear colleagues. Do we have any questions on the floor? Good afternoon, Anastasia Kravchenko, Ukrinform. I have a couple of questions. You're saying that after the Russian shelling of the new ports, the cost of freight has increased. So to what extent? Well, there were statements about $8 to $10 per ton, and there were some estimates about $30 per ton. It's difficult to say right now because the last time I was hearing it was about $80 per ton. Well, the month of July is almost over. The grain corridor was not working all the month. So what is the condition of the agrarian business now in July when we were not exporting anything by the sea? Well, really looking at previous month, we were able to export a little bit more than 2 million tons. I think 2.1 million tons. Obviously, it's not the best month, and when the grain corridor was operating, we could do better using the residues of the last year, which would allow the agrarians to get additional proceeds for the rent of the land, paying taxes, and preparing for the new season. This year, given the dynamics like this, in fact, we will be sitting on our grain, because given the export potential that we have, we need to export at least 4.7 million tons, and if we export 2 million tons per month, so we will have to export the potential of the year 23 within 2 years. Well, Mr. Denis, you said that we will be sitting on our grain. It would be good, but given the latest events when the occupiers were shelling Odessa and targeting the grain silos, we understand that there might be some new price challenges for agrarians. But talking about the storage of our grain under the condition of not so good operation of export ways, so how should we store our grain? Well, the enemy intentionally targets the terminals with grain, with oil crops. Those cereals were already contracted, so the enemy actually does harm to both Ukraine and the contractors who have already contracted those cereals. But we hear statements from China and India to continue the operation of the grain deal. Talking about the grain silos themselves, the situation is not as critical as the last season, because the last season, during the same period, the residues were pressing on the prices. Now this potential is way lower, and during the current harvesting campaign we have time to arrange the export, not to create additional pressure on the storage system. And in principle, if we look at the territory of Ukraine, the most problematic thing is in the deoccupied parts of Kherson, Kharkiv, Sumy, and Mykolaiv region, which end up under shelling, and the agrarian infrastructure is being destroyed. So the agrarians don't have premises to store their grain, and if they store it under an open sky, and if the weather gets worse, the harvest deteriorates. It's important to help those agrarians now. Us, as the Ukrainian Agrarian Council, we gather funds from the farmers from central and western Ukraine to hand them over to those farmers who have problems with the storage facilities, so they build hangars or invest those funds in the future sowing campaign. And this is why we should think about lending options for those farmers from the northern regions. They cannot use in full the program 579, and we address the Cabinet of Ministers for the time being with the request to consider the extension of lending programs, because there are no categories of agrarians in Sumy and Kharkiv, Chernihiv region, let alone Donetsk and Luhansk regions. But before we start harvesting grain crops, we don't have huge problems with storing. But again, I want to remind you, last year we were using the support from our partners, the World Food Program, who were providing polymer sleeves to us, which can store up to 20 tons of products, and many agrarians were using that option for storage. And if the situation becomes critical, the Ministry of Agriculture could get back to that option. Thank you very much for joining our broadcast, dear spectators. I'm reminding you, joining us was Denis Marchuk, the Deputy Head of Ukrainian Agrarian Council, and we continue working together for our victory. We want to thank our armed forces, and glory to Ukraine.